Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Susan Bowden, and I am the Digital Outreach Coordinator for the Archaeological Conservancy. We are very thankful that you've chosen to be with us tonight. If you aren't already a Conservancy member, we invite you to visit us online and join in preserving archaeological sites across the nation. Watch the chat where I'll be sharing some links for you to follow shortly. Before we start tonight's lecture, I'd like to share a few reminders. Please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen during the presentation. I'll be collecting questions and facilitating Q&A after the presentation is over. If you're watching us on Facebook, I've got Mandy in the background. She's helping out over there, and she's going to be sending your questions to me also, so feel free to ask questions there. Using that Q&A button if you're in the Zoom call ensures that your question isn't lost in the chat, so that's a great place to put it. If you have technical difficulties of any kind, we do have that live stream happening on our Facebook channel, and we are also recording the session so you can catch up with it sometime in the next couple of days. It will be posted. I'll be sending out an email to let all of you know that it's available. We encourage you to watch it again or to share it with friends or family that weren't able to be with us tonight. So I'm going to stop my share so that I can introduce to you our speaker for tonight. I am incredibly pleased to welcome you, Brian Fritz, as our guest lecturer. Brian is the owner and principal archaeological investigator for, let's see if I can do this right, Brian, Quemahoning. Did I do okay? LLC, a cultural resources consulting business that specializes in geoarchaeology, soil geomorphology, and GIS solutions for complex archaeological projects. He holds undergraduate degrees in geology and anthropology from Clarion University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in geology from the University of Akron. He's a registered professional archaeologist, has 20 years of experience, and he's the inventor of a very innovative new machine called the Paleo Digger that he's going to be talking with you about tonight. When I had the chance to see videos of the Paleo Digger at work on the Conservancy's Barton Preserve in Maryland, I immediately let our regional director, Kelly Berliner, know I wanted Brian to come and talk with us about it. So Brian, I am thrilled you're here. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can talk to us about this amazing invention.
Okay. Well, hello and welcome, and I'd like to thank Susan and also Kelly Berliner for making this happen. I feel this is a privilege to present to you here tonight. Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes.
And there we go. So I'm going to start out a little bit about my backstory and how I came about this idea of using mechanized archaeology for first American studies. I grew up on, there we go, there we go. I grew up on a farm in southwestern Pennsylvania. We grew potatoes for Snyder's of Berlin potato chips. And while we were farming, we would find Native American artifacts across our farm fields and also in the neighboring farms. And this is something I really got into, and I was a teenager. I was surface collecting quite a bit, trying to find artifacts. We didn't have a lot of sites on our farm, but over the time we collected a nice collection of artifacts. About this time, I was 13 years old, and National Geographic published this what I call their First Americans issue, and it has this gorgeous photograph on the cover of Paleo-Indian period artifacts lying in the snow. And this photograph really feeds the imagination, especially for a 13-year-old who's out collecting Native American artifacts. And this photograph kind of puts to me that question of how did these people live in this ice age condition? You know, the first people to arrive in North America in these very harsh conditions. And about the same time, the Somerset chapter of the Society for Pennsylvania Archaeology published a booklet that highlighted fluted points that were found in Somerset County. This is where I lived in Pennsylvania, Somerset County. And this really blew my mind, because that meant that these people, these first Americans, were actually living where I was living. So I scoured all over our farm fields trying to find a fluted point. for years. Well, eventually, one day, my father and I were walking on actually a neighbor's farm along on a floodplain along Stony Creek River, and my dad picked this up and he said, "What's this?" And I said, "Well, that's a fluted point." And he calmly said, "I thought so." So today, I still have not found a fluted point myself, but my dad has one to his credit here, at least a base of one. Well, some years after, Stan Lance, a retired archaeologist from Carnegie Museum, and Gary Fogelman, who publishes an archaeology magazine in Pennsylvania, they assembled this book, Fluted Point Survey of Pennsylvania. And this book covers every county in Pennsylvania, and they compiled all the known fluted points that were found across the state. And what's important about this book is it shows that there were Paleo-Indians in practically every county across Pennsylvania. And I probably documented 1,000 points in that book. Also, the Pennsylvania Archaeological Site Survey, kept by P.A. Shippo, the Pennsylvania Historic Preservation Office, they have on record 300 or more sites that list a Paleo-Indian period component within the site. And this is the example of the site 36SO305 that where my dad found the fluted point that I recorded. So what this means is that there's Paleo-Indians were ubiquitous across Pennsylvania, but most of these sites are found in upland settings by collectors in the plow zone. So there's no preservation of the sites as far as cultural features, and not much for us to study archaeologically. And there's only really 3 sites that have been excavated in Pennsylvania that have a stratified context where the Paleo-Indian component is deeply buried and separated from the later occupations. The best known is the Meadowcroft Rock Shelter site in southwestern PA near Avella along Cross Creek. It's a huge rock shelter. This is open to the public. You can go and visit this site. They have it enclosed now, and it's a nice trip to go visit one of the oldest sites in Pennsylvania. And in eastern PA along the Delaware River is the Shawnee Mini Seek site. This is an important site that it was about 10 feet deep in the floodplain along the Delaware. And in central Pennsylvania, along the Susquehanna River, is the Wallace site. And this one isn't as well known because it was part of a compliance archaeology project related to Department of Transportation project on where they had to do the archaeology ahead of road construction. But here, the fluted points in the Paleo-Indian component was found just above the gravels in the floodplain. And it's a similar situation across much of the neighboring states in North America, where there's quite a few fluted points found, and particularly in the southern states where they're pretty common, but they're mostly found by collectors in the plow zone. And the number of stratified sites are pretty few. So why an absence of stratified Paleoindian sites? Well, Stan Lance, the gentleman who did the fluted point survey for Pennsylvania, back in 1984, when I was still in high school, he published in an article that the sites are deeply buried and hard to find. Since then, geomorphology and soil science and geoarchaeology has shown that there's a geological filter at play. The streams and rivers, over time, they meander across the stream valley. The meanders cut away the older terraces and deposit new sediment to form new terraces and new floodplains. And over time, the older sites get eroded away. So the older the site is, the better chance that the stream channel will eventually remove it and destroy it. More recent work by Frank Vento here in Pennsylvania on looking at the geoarchaeology of the river sediments, he suggests that during the Younger Dryas, this is the climatic period at the very end of the Ice Age, that last cold snap, just after the Clovis culture people kind of disappear from the archaeological record. He believes that these rivers became particularly active at that time and really aggressively eroded back and forth across the stream valleys and removing essentially most of the Clovis sites. However, when I was doing my master's thesis work in geology, which is geoarchaeology related, I found soils in the Allegheny National Forest region of Pennsylvania. This is kind of the northern part of Pennsylvania, but in the area that had not been glaciated. And these soils appeared to be very old to me, the characteristics of the soil. So as part of my research, I did AMS dating of the soil and also paired with OSL dates, these optical stimulated luminescence dates. So it's two different methods of dating. So instead of dating charcoal, I was dating the carbon in the soil that was preserved, the organic matter in the soil. But by running the two dates together, you could get a kind of a time sequence of the sediments. And basically what it shows is that the river sediments here, during the time that Clovis people were living in Pennsylvania, there was a stable surface along this river on the floodplain during that time. Now, I didn't find Clovis at this site, but what I found is a stable surface where Clovis people could have camped had they happened to visit that location. This got me to thinking that maybe these land surfaces are better preserved than we're recognizing, and we're just not recognizing these potential site locations. So that takes me back to what Stan Lance said in 1984, that these sites are just deeply buried and hard to find. And the reason they're hard to find is because it is very labor intensive and expensive to do archaeology deep into the river deposits. Once we dig more than 1.5 meters or 5 feet, then the safety requirements from OSHA come into play, and we have to do either step back excavations or use specialized wall shoring equipment and other safety equipment that is very expensive to put into practice. So how do we find stratified Paleoindian sites? So we need to dig deeper, and we need to dig deeper more often. So in doing the geoarchaeology work that I do as a consultant, I use a 3¼ inch bucket auger, and most archaeologists and geoarchaeologists that do this kind of work use this same tool. And it's a hand tool that you can dig a 3¼ inch diameter hole down through the soil and see how deep the soils are before we do the archaeology. It's a way to gauge how much we need to do as far as the archaeology work. So back in 2007, a local chapter of the Society of Pennsylvania Archaeology was interested in finding the remains of Fort Michaud. Now, this was one of the 4 French forts that were built during the the French and Indian War in Western Pennsylvania. They knew about where it was in the town of Franklin, but they didn't have an exact location. So I recommended that we lay out transects and use the bucket auger and drill a hole every 5 meters. And we documented the soil, but then we also screened for all the soil for the artifacts that were in the soil. And it was surprising the amount of artifacts we found. We accurately identified the location of not only the fort, but the specific features within the fort. And we recovered colonial era artifacts in the auger. So for the later excavations verified our initial findings. And it got me thinking, what if instead of this 3¼ inch auger, what if we used a bigger auger that was, say, 8 inches in diameter, or maybe even 10 or 12 inches in diameter? And I stewed on this idea for a while until finally, in 2012, I started working on this, what I call it an experiment. It was building a 12-inch auger, basically a bucket auger. But when you get to that size, a 12-inch size, it's almost too big to handle by hand. So I designed it to go on this little track machine. You can rent these at rental places fairly inexpensively. They're easy to find. And I built it to go on this little machine. And the way it worked is when you rotate the auger clockwise into the ground, it digs down to 10 centimeters. And then when you get to 10 centimeters, I'd stop the rotation and then rotate it counterclockwise, and that would close the bottom of the bucket. Then I could lift it out of the ground without the soil falling out. And then it would tip out to the side. And on the top of the bucket, there's a hinge and a latch that could open it up and remove the soil. And this worked much better than I expected. I was able to drill a 1.5 meter deep hole through hard upland soils. This wasn't along the river. This is on the farm and on the hilltops. And I was surprised at how well it worked. So I once again stewed about this for some time. And then in 2018, at the Society for Pennsylvania Archaeology annual meeting, this is before I built anything, substantial, I proposed building this machine that I was calling the Paleo Digger. So I was proposing to build a machine with a stationary drill mass so that you could accurately control the depth up and down. It would drill a hole 50 centimeters in diameter. That's about 22 inches. And I figured that I could probably make it at least drill 3 meters deep. So that was kind of my design criteria. And the idea behind this is that I would be able to do systematic survey in the same way we do shovel tests, where we dig every 15 meters. We dig a shovel test down, but about a meter deep is about as deep as you can go with a shovel. And but here with this machine, we'd be able to go as deep as 3 meters. And by doing that, we would be able to delineate the archaeological sites not only horizontally, but also vertically, and collect really good data on where the actual archaeological deposits were in the floodplains. And then, use the machine to find the sites and then have highly targeted hand excavations to hit the best parts of the sites. So I went to work designing the machine, the parts, on paper and in CAD, computer-aided drafting. Started cutting out the parts, collecting the different components. We have a shop on the farm where my father and I did all this work. My father is my welder, and this was a project for the two of us to work. We worked together on this, kind of designing it and putting it together. A lot of trial and error testing, retesting, modifications. Kept working on it until finally in 2019, I introduced the first Paleo Digger machine, and I needed a place to actually try it out. So I chose a site called Slickerman Bottom. I chose this site because there was a fluted point found on this site, and it was along a small stream, so I had alluvial soils. That's what I really needed to test it in, is alluvial soils, floodplain soils. And it was close enough to the farm that I was able to walk the machine down the road to the site. I had a small crew of volunteers. It was slow going because I was learning how to run the machine and figuring out how to make it work. And it really did very well. It dug a really nice hole, dug nice holes. We did 4 test pits. And turns out we didn't find any Native American artifacts at all. We found some historic artifacts. The stream was so small that the soils were relatively young, probably all historic in age. So it was also the first time we tested this rotary screen. And this was an important test because it was the first time I could really get soil in it and gauge how well it worked. Then later in, I think 2022, I got my first compliance project. This is where it was a highway project that needed archaeology done, so it's a paid contract. And Gary Kopic of Terracon contacted me, and he said, hey, we got this project along the Susquehanna River, and we need to dig 4 meters deep. Can your machine do that? And I said, certainly. And as soon as I got off the phone with Gary, I started to panic because I designed the machine to go 3 meters, not 4 meters. So I spent the next 2 weeks redesigning the machine, figuring out how to make it dig deeper, and eventually came up with a design that I was able to go 7 meters deep with it with my current tooling. So this project was in the winter of January of 2022, and this is along a very busy stretch of Route 322, where it goes over Duncan Island, right along. It's right between the Juniata River and the Susquehanna River. This highway is really busy with very fast-moving trucks, and it's dangerous, and that's why the Department of Transportation wants to do something to make this safer. So that's part of the whole mitigation project. So we dug a couple of test pits here to see what was down deep. Notice there's a black ring at the soil level. And I'll explain that next here. With these transportation projects where you're doing archaeology next to a highway, there's often a layer of coarse fill across the natural soils. And that's the case with this project. So the solution here, my machine won't dig through chunks of concrete and asphalt. So we had to take that off with a backhoe. And then once that was removed, Terracon's crew dug 1 by 1 meter squares down 5 feet into the natural soil levels. And they were finding archaeological remains in these levels. And once they got down to that OSHA limit where you had to start to apply the other safety regulations, we put a culvert pipe, a 24-inch plastic culvert pipe vertically into the hole. and then backfilled the hole around that. So this gave me a location where I could pull my machine over top of the hole, and you could see down the pipe to the bottom of the test pit, and I could drill down to the bottom and then remove the soil and keep drilling down 10 centimeters at a time, deeper down to the 4-meter depth. And this worked very well. You can see the culvert pipe. Looking down through the culvert pipe. You can see down through the hole I drilled. We just touched the top of the water table. You can see the bright bit of water down at the bottom. But it dug such a nice hole, it didn't even disturb the hand auger hole that was next to it. So we succeeded there at that location. We didn't find many artifacts, but we cleared at least those test pits for the archaeology so the project could move ahead. So in 2023, I got a similar highway project. This one was also located along the Susquehanna River, but up towards Scranton in a community called West Pittston. And this was January 2023, another cold winter, but we had a nice week of warm weather. And we dug, I think, 7 test pits between 2 bridges that were slated to be replaced. So PennDOT needed to know if there was archaeological sites that were going to be impacted. So once again, I had a crew. This time it was AD Marble was the contract archaeology firm, and we dug these test pits. Had a crew helping me from AD Marble. So we found a few artifacts, but once again, I think we were able to clear the project for the construction project. This time, instead of using the plastic culvert pipes, I built these square boxes that we inserted into the hole. And they work just like the plastic culvert pipes, but with one distinct advantage. I can pull them out at the end of each test pit, and then they can backfill it, and then reuse these boxes. So how we did this is the crew was working ahead of me, digging the 1x1s, and then while I was working on a deep test pit, and then as soon as they would get done, they drop a box in, backfill around it, and then I would move over to that one, and they'd move on to the next 1x1. So this worked very well. And but I can also drill without using these boxes. I can drill right from the ground surface. And we did one test pit without using the box at West Pittston. And so in the fall of 2023, I was invited onto a project along the Roanoke River in Virginia on Leesville Lake. This is the lake that supports a hydroelectric facility owned by American Electric Power. And this was a very complex multi-year project. We had to load my machine and a hydraulic excavator onto a barge and then take this equipment out across the lake to some islands that were in the middle of the lake. And we actually drilled the test pits on the islands. These islands are actually underwater part of the year. So I can't talk about the details of this project because I think it's an ongoing 5-year compliance project and it's still underway. But when it's done, I'm hoping that they will do some kind of public reporting on this site. I believe that it's going to be important to First American studies, what they find here. So moving on to the Potomac River, coming back north to Maryland, Western Maryland. To the Barton site. So this is the site owned by the Archaeological Conservancy. And I was at an Eastern States Archaeological Conference meeting, and Zach mentioned the Barton site. Zach Singer, he's the state archaeologist, state terrestrial archaeologist for Maryland. He said the Barton site might be a good place for the Paleo Digger. So we talked about it, and Kelly Berliner and Zach Singer and Robert Wall of Townsend University kind of got together, and I decided this was going to be the first Archaeology X Paleo Digger grant. So I funded the cost of bringing the Paleo Digger machine to the Barton site for 5 days of deep testing. And Zach really put together a nice group of volunteers to do this project. Now, the Barton site's been known for a long time. It's a favorite site of collectors. John here he says he walked the site probably 1,000 times, and he had found this fluted point near where we were digging years and years ago, and he came out to the site every day to watch what we were doing. And then this is Robert Wall. He's a professor at Townsend University. If you want to know about the Barton site, he's the one who spent the most time here. He has been bringing field schools out since the 1980s. He's excavated late woodland period sites here. Everybody from Paleo on to the contact period was probably at this location, and he can tell you about those occupations. And then, of course, Zach Singer, who is the Maryland State terrestrial archaeologist. He's kind of the mover and shaker of putting this project together. And Zach really gets into his archaeology. He was so excited about what we found in this test pit, he almost looks like he's crawling down in it. We actually found a feature down in this test pit down deep. And he was in there with a flashlight measuring how deep it was. And we actually collected carbonized material from this feature for a radiocarbon date. And I'm anxious to hear him report about that. And of course, the Conservancy's own Kelly Berliner was out. She was screening, backfilling, setting up equipment and everything. She was busy helping out with the project. And of course, the volunteers. This project could not have happened without the numerous volunteers that came out. Some of them traveled quite a long distance to be here. A lot of them were members of the Archaeological Society of Maryland. And they were so enthusiastic. It was late one day, and Zach came over to me and said, well, we should probably stop digging with the machine because we got some soil that we're still screening. We're going to close up for the day. And Zach walked away to take care of other matters. And a minute or two later, one of the crew members, the volunteer crew, walked over to me and she said, keep digging. She said, we're okay, just keep digging. And they were excited because we were finding some good stuff that day. So it was an excellent crew, and I have to give thanks to them for all the work they did out here. So I have a video. It's probably going to be a little bit jerky in its running, but we'll see how it goes here. So this was video contributed by John Waugh. He is a geoarchaeologist and soil scientist who helped on this project, and this was drone footage from his drone. And you can see here how the machine swings out, and we dump the bucket, and then I close that back up, and it swings back towards the hole, and I lower it down to get the next 10 centimeter level while the guys are shoveling soil into the rotary screen. I like to just pick up the tub and dump it in, but they after doing that all day, it's easier to shovel it in. Here I want to show how the rotary screen tips back over. Once the bulk of the soil is out, then we dump the rotary screen, what remains, into another tub. And then that tub, the items in that tub are transferred over to a flat screen where we actually do the final sifting and sorting out of the artifacts. And this three-stage process is deliberately designed this way so that it gives a buffer in the workflow. That way while I'm going down for the next level, somebody's shoveling the soil into the rotary screen while others are working on the flat screens sorting artifacts. And if I get ahead of the screening, if the soil gets to be wet, often towards the bottom of the test pit, it's more wet, and it start to back up, we can stockpile the soil in tubs and buckets. Well, that way I can keep the drilling going, and then they're catching up while I'm moving the machine to the next test pit. So sorry for the jerky video, but my internet isn't that fast here. So part of this is when I started this whole project, I was concerned, should I keep this a secret while I build this, or should I don't know how to approach it. So my first colleague that I talked about the machine to, I explained to her how it works. She was also interested in First American Studies, and her name was Lucy. And I explained the machine, and her first comment was, that's a terrible idea. And that comment was such a relief because it told me that this is something that isn't in the minds of archaeologists, using a machine. And I realized at that point that instead of keeping it a secret while I build this, what I need to do is publicize it and explain it so that it becomes known and accepted. And that's why I launched Archaeology X. It documents the whole process of why I built the machine and the process of building it and putting it to use. So I have a set of videos on Archaeology X, as a YouTube channel, where you can see the machine actively at work. And now here for the first time this year, I am announcing the Archaeology X Paleo Digger Grant for 2025, continuing this search for the first Americans. And anybody who's interested in this grant, they can contact me. My email address is here, and it'll be on the video on the Conservancy's website. And also Susan can give out my contact information. So once again, this grant will be for 5 days with a paleo machine. And this time I'm going to tie it to a crowdsource funding campaign. Now, this is going to be a little different than what you think of like a Kickstarter. It's probably going to be a Kickstarter campaign. The way this is going to work is I'm going to solicit the research proposals, and I'm hoping to get 3 or 4 or 5 research proposals from across the country. And then we're going to launch the Kickstarter campaign. And the top funding tiers of the Kickstarter campaign, the reward is you will get to review the research proposals and have a vote on the committee to select the winning proposal. So I don't know of any Kickstarter campaign that's been operated like this. So this is something new. We're going to try. Don't know how it's going to work, but hey, what the heck? Let's give it a try. But the idea is not only to provide funding for the cost of getting the machine to the site. It's very expensive renting a skid loader and the travel and lodging expenses. But also, more importantly, I think, is giving the community a chance to weigh in on the archaeology and having a voice in what archaeology is being done. And that's kind of what I'd like to see. I'd like to build a community around this. So at that, I can turn it back over to Susan. And I guess I can unshare, stop share. There we go.
And you're only temporarily handing it over to me because I'm going to hand it back to you. We've got some time for some Q&A. Thank you so much for sharing. And, Brian, the video was a little bit chunky, but I put the link to your YouTube channel in the chat. So if you are on with us, do a copy and paste and you'll have those. And I will also send those out in the follow-up email so they can actually watch it in action. So before I start with questions, you had somebody, Jim Egnor was on. He said, not a question, but I'm needing to step away. A very innovative design and instrument. Well done. So simple to do, huh? So was it simple? Did you have an easy time with this? Or was the trial and error process painful as you went through putting it together?
I was surprised at how well, I mean, we had things that we tried, but we iterate so much. I mean, every time we go out, the way I approach it isn't how much we find or how well it works, it's how much I learn. So every time I take it out, at the end of the project, I make a list of everything I want to change, upgrade, and improve. And then we go to work making those changes. So it's an iterative process. It's kind of what we call validated learning. So each time we go out with it, we learn more and improve it. And we've had some failures, but I've been able to fix all the failures in the field and keep the project going, including Barton. Had some difficulties at Barton, and the crew stuck with us, and we got the work done. But that's all part of it.
Fantastic. I love that perspective, right? That it's a learning process. So you've got a couple of questions, one from Jane and one from Bonnie, and both of them are wondering about critics and any resistance. Or is anybody saying, oh, it's possibly destructive to things that are down there? What's your response?
Okay, that's typically the first question people ask. So this is, archaeology is very conservative, with the exception of GPS, computers, and electronic equipment. We're essentially doing everything the same way we did in the 1930s. We have not modernized like other fields of any other kind of occupation. So one of the hurdles I've had, and this is why I went public with it with the website, is not only do I have to get archaeologists to accept it, but also the review agencies, the state historic preservation offices, the archaeologists at DOT, federal highways. So this was a hard time, especially when I launched the whole project at the beginning of COVID. And the problem there was everybody was just trying to keep their offices open. They didn't want to talk about new methods. So COVID kind of got away. PennDOT decided they were going to try, Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, they decided to give it a try at Riverlands. And now I have to say, PennDOT is probably my #1 advocate. They really have come aboard with the whole thing, and also the State Historic Preservation Office in Pennsylvania. So I've been really pleased with the acceptance, at least here in Pennsylvania, and it's spreading now. We're going to see it in Virginia and other states as well. You just need to become familiar with it. But what people often compare the machine to what they perceive as the pristine way of doing archaeology by hand. But in reality, when you got a field crew out working 8 hours a day, digging shovel tests that they aren't finding anything in day after day, the archaeology isn't as pristine as we'd like to think. And we damage artifacts and dig through features with shovels all the time, and not always the best. And so what we're finding is this is probably no worse than digging with shovels, and maybe in some cases better. We've already pulled potsherds out that were 3 or 4 inches in size that were undamaged with the machine. So far, it's been pretty good on artifacts.
Michael's interested in knowing, can you speak to the approximate daily cost of running the Paleo Digger?
It depends a lot on the project, how deep we're digging. So the deeper you dig, the more time it takes. So what I usually do is when somebody's interested in a compliance project or any kind of project where they want to know what the cost is, I want to know how many holes they're going to dig and how deep. And then I'll do a calculation, and what I'll do is I'll give a flat price. This will be the price for doing that, and then I'll have a leeway that if it takes 50% longer, the price is capped at that. That way it gives us, there's a lot of unknowns, especially with a new technology. So it's probably, if I had to just give a ballpark, it's probably around $2,500 a day. And there's also a mobilization cost that I add in. There's a cost just to get to the site. But it sounds expensive, but when you start figuring out how to do this, you try to figure out how to dig down to 4 meters by hand, and what you need to do, it's probably cheaper by an order of magnitude. And a lot of compliance archaeology, where they're figuring out where the road is going to go, they don't want to buy the properties first. They want to do the archaeology and then figure out where they want to build it. So digging large, wide test pits to get down deep is not really an option for a lot of these projects. Plus, it's a safety issue. We're doing this deep testing from the ground surface, and we're not putting people down into the deep test pit.
Yeah. Have you yet used the digger in conjunction with LiDAR or GPR or any of the other technologies?
At Barton, Dr. David Leslie did GPR, so we're going to see how that corresponds to what we're finding with the Paleo Digger testing. And also, John Wald did some hand auger tests, and they also did vibrocore there. So we're going to have a lot of data from the Barton site to kind of work together with the Paleo Digger findings. So it's kind of exciting to see all these different techniques working together.
So Brian, the next question that I got here, we might want to ask for some clarification, but I'm going to go ahead and pose it just in case you think you can run with it. This person is saying, do you think there's a limit to the process, or could it be more expensive? And I'm not sure if they're wondering, can you go deeper or wider or multiple spots at once or what?
Well, this depends on how much area you want to. If you're, I could say if we're doing a 15-meter interval with our test pits, that's the standard shovels test survey interval in Pennsylvania. Now, at Barton, we were doing 8 meters because they knew they had a site and they knew they had artifacts down deep. So they wanted a very tight control over it. So the tighter you bring your test pits together, the more test pits you need to cover a certain area. So it all depends on the site and how deep. The deeper we go, the more time it takes. I can go as deep as 7 meters. The deepest I've been so far is about 4.5 meters.
Okay.
So 4.5, we're looking at, that's like 16, 17 feet. And so the cost, I just have to calculate it. I have a spreadsheet where I can plug in the data and it'll estimate a cost and time frame. Really, it's the time, how
Mhm.
much time. A lot depends on how wet the soils are and how hard they are to screen. Because really, the limiting factor in a lot of is usually getting the soil through the screen. Even with a rotary screen, you still have to finish it off on a flat screen. And I can really remove, especially in the upper levels, the first meter and a half, I can remove soil very fast with it. It's hard to keep up.
Okay. So I think you talked about this a little bit in your presentation, but I may be confusing the little bit of research that I've done watching your videos. Um, when it comes to having found an artifact, are you able to document where in the stratigraphy that artifact is coming from using the tool, or are you doing something else to document that?
No. So we're lifting the soil out of the hole 10 centimeters at a time. So I dig the first 10 centimeters, lift it out, goes into the screen. I go back down, get the next 10 centimeters, and we're tracking those levels at a time. So we know what level the artifacts come from as we're digging. And that's how we know how deep they are. I can actually dig in smaller increments of like 5 centimeters as well. But it would take, you would double the time because every time you go down is another amount of time. So if you're going 5 centimeters, that's twice as many times going down the hole to get to the same depth. So that's a factor.
Yeah. Did you go through a process to patent the machine?
Okay, I did something kind of unique here. Um, I filed, I did write a patent, and there was no way I was going to hire a patent attorney. So I took it upon myself to write the patent, and I did the research and so forth. I wrote a patent. I filed it with the patent office. And as soon as the patent office published it, so that it's, this is the patent application, I public domained it. So it is now in the public domain. If you want to build one of these, be my guest, but I can tell you, it's not easy. Um, Patents, they're kind of what do you would call it? It's nice to be able to say I have a patent, but really it doesn't have a lot of value. If you want to defend a patent, you really have to hire an attorney and pay a lot of money up front just to take it to court. There's no patent police. It's all done through the court system. And I don't have $50,000 to set aside to fight somebody on a patent. I'd rather say, okay, if you're going to build one of these, go ahead, share with me what you're doing, and we'll talk about it. Let's see what we can come up with. That's the way I approach it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you've got a lot of questions coming in. I'm trying to keep up with everything. Mandy, thank you for the help you're giving me because it's getting crazy. Um, so a couple of questions. Wondering about oh, where did it go? What types of sites do you want to use it on? And that was a wonder that I had. If money wasn't an issue and time wasn't an issue, do you have areas of the country or specific sites that you really are burning? Like, I really want to go to that particular place.
Sites exactly like Barton,
Yeah.
down up deeper where if you're finding fluted points on the surface, that's not where I want to be because they're already in the plow zone. There's no deep archaeology there. I want to dig where the stuff's so deep that you can't find it on the surface. And locations where we know there's a high potential for these early sites because of the way the river sediments are deposited. That's where geoarchaeologists and soil scientists like John Wall and Dave Leslie come in. They can figure out where these locations are. And so places like Barton, even out west, places like the Gulf site would be another one. They have a similar situation where the old sites are the deepest sites are the oldest, and they're down about 2 meters deep. Those are the kind of sites that this is meant to be used on.
Mhm.
I don't know about sand dunes, maybe. I don't know. I don't never tried sand dunes. That's another possibility.
We have some in New Mexico. You can come see us. Um, a question about the types of soils. You talked about wet versus dry. Um, is alluvial soil the only soil type that you're wanting to look at, or are there other types of soils that you might want to dig into? You mentioned possibly sand.
Well, yeah, the alluvial soils where the sites are very deep because of repeated episodes of flooding, where they just get deeper and deeper. Um, there's sites along the Ohio River that are 20 feet deep. Um, and my wife is also an archaeologist, and she's worked on sites along the Ohio where they were down, I think, 25 feet, and they were just finding the early archaic uh, uh, um, Kirk points at that depth. And so those are the kind of sites. Now in the uplands, the soils aren't deep. Everything's kind of in the plow zone. Um, but sand dunes are another possibility. I don't know, or colluvium. A slope where the soils have washed down slope and maybe are more than a meter deep. That's another possibility. So we're still exploring all these options. So this is kind of new. We're learning
Yeah,
as we go.
it's exciting. Um, we talked a little bit about the cost of using the digger. We've got a question here about an estimate of the cost of building the digger, and do you think that you could replicate it? Is that something that you're planning to do down the road?
I could replicate it, but I'm having too much fun just running it. Um, uh, you could build it. It could be built probably better. Um, it's what we call farm engineering. We tend to build things heavier than they need to be. Um, that's the characteristics of growing up on a farm. And but yes, it could be built, but I don't really plan on manufacturing. That's a whole different realm. I'd rather just work with people and bring it out and where it's needed.
Mhm. When you're coming across things like pottery sherds, is the cutting edge on the boring piece pulverizing those sherds? Are they coming up whole? You mentioned earlier that you had a few pieces that were coming out fairly large.
If the sherd happens to be in the wall where the edge of the test unit is, it's just like when you take a shovel down and dig deep, it's going to cut through a pot sherd. Same with the machine, so it's similar. But if it's inside the hole, it just lifts it up out of the hole. Like I said, I've had big pieces of pot sherd down on the sites in Virginia. We had a piece of pot sherd about that big that lifted right out without any damage at all. I had quite a few pot sherds in there. But we damage stuff with shovels as well. Back some years ago, my crew found a early archaic Kirk site down 116 centimeters, and they realized they had the site when they cut the Kirk point in half with a shovel. So it's just the way it goes sometimes.
Yeah. What other kinds of things are you finding besides points and sherds? Are there other things that are coming out of these test pits?
At Barton we had quite a few artifacts and some down very deep. And I'm not the Zach is still working on the artifacts, but they're he's pretty excited. Let's put it that way. I think he's pretty sure that we got a Clovis component there, and uh, but we also intersected a feature down at 190 to 200 centimeters. That's very deep for a feature, and we got carbonized material out of that feature. So they're running a radiocarbon date on that carbonized material, and we're going to see how that fits into the artifacts and where we find the artifacts at different levels at Barton. So that's going to be very important.
Exciting, yeah.
Very exciting.
Let's see. What challenges do you face in recording the stratigraphy as you're going down? In your slides, it looked like the walls get heavily smeared as the bucket turns.
Yes. So we're as far as recording the stratigraphy, one of the things I'm working on is a method to after the hole dug is tools that I can go down the hole and scrape the sides of the walls and maybe take a camera down. This is something yet to be tried, but um, we were able to actually lift. Sometimes we would hit rocks that we couldn't get in the bucket. I was able to go down with a hoe, take to a longer pole, and actually lift the rocks out of the bucket so we could keep digging, or out of the hole so we could keep digging. And so I'm thinking along those lines. I made some tools here for the next time out where I'm going to try scraping down the walls and see if we can run a camera down the hole and actually maybe shoot video of the walls with a tape so we can actually see the soil levels with a light going
Mhm.
down the hole. So it proved to be an effective geoarchaeology tool as well as archaeology. So we'll have to see.
Interesting. Have you used it yet in really rocky soils?
Um, Ideally, on floodplains, if you're hitting the gravels at the base of the floodplain, there really isn't the conventional wisdom. There isn't anything deeper. So on rocky soils, if you're in the uplands where there's rocky soils, then you're really not digging any deeper than the plow zone anyways. So there's no need for it in those type of soils. It's the river soils that we're interested in digging, and they don't generally have a lot of rocks in them. So it's mainly for that situation.
Okay. And several people, or a couple of people at least, have mentioned different places that they're wondering, have you taken the digger to New Jersey, or would you like to take it to the Caribbean? So you may have some opportunities here.
Caribbean. I know I've already been across one lake. I don't know about. I don't know how you would move a machine to the Caribbean. Interesting to talk about it. Um, but I'm open to the 48 continental United States at this point in time. Alaska's a little bit of a stretch, and Hawaii obviously is pretty far away. But yes, I'm interested in taking it to wherever there might be something interesting to look at, where there's a potential for finding these early sites, particularly. Everybody would like to find the pre-Clovis sites. That's
Right.
you got to find the Clovis first, and then dig deeper. That's kind of the key, and that's what we're interested in.
Just for context on the Caribbean comment, it was Mark Barnes that mentioned that. He said, I was involved when I worked with the NPS in the Southeast on a site along northern Puerto Rico that has 30 cultural levels over a depth of 5 meters. If you're interested in an example of a deep site in the Caribbean, please let me know, and shared an email address. So I'll make sure that you have that so that you guys can connect.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Digging on a beach sands, that's an interesting idea. Yeah.
And he just added some more information. The Puerto Rico site is called the Paseo del Indio site, and it's in an alluvial area. So yeah, I will make sure that you're connected. He's asking that I make sure and do that. So yes, Mark, I will do that, and I will get your email address to Brian this evening.
Very interesting.
Right. All right, you've got a few comments people put in that I want to make sure and share with you. First one says, "This is fabulous when I think of all the hours digging shovel tests for naught. And this could have been done so much more quickly and efficiently. Wish I had this over the last 40 years, not to mention how backbreaking, tedious, and time-consuming shovel testing is." So a kudos to you. Another comment, a fellow geoarchaeologist who has done work in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest and witnessed the time necessary to dig with a track hoe in the gummy soils of the Mississippi floodplain. I can see the potential here. So, and then another one that says, "I think you have a great dad." I agree. If your dad's involved in making this with you,
Yeah.
he deserves
Yeah, I
a pat
do.
on the back too. Let's see. Oh, another comment from Facebook. I remember using an auger in a well-turned mitten. We hit a rock in the side of the hole about 9 feet down. It was the diameter of the hole, and eventually we pushed it to the bottom and couldn't go further. This device would have been much better. So it sounds to me like there's an awful lot of potential for next steps for you. It's exciting to see the interest and the support for what you're doing, Brian.
I appreciate it.
All right, well, I've got a lot of patching up to do to get information sent off to you, Brian. I will do that. We don't have any other questions in there right now, so I think that we can all probably sign off. And if we're on the West Coast or in the mountain region, we can go have dinner. The rest of you can go probably head towards bed. Thanks for joining us tonight. We appreciate it. Brian did want me to let you know that we are scheduled to hear from Zach Singer and Bob Wall, both of whom were mentioned tonight. They're going to be talking about the work that was done at Barton. So if you're curious about that work, come back with us on March 12th. And you'll watch our social media channels and things, and we'll send out announcements so you can find out what they really did find with this Paleo Digger. Do you want to speak to that at all, Brian?
Yes, I'm really excited. I know some of the findings. I'm just kind of holding back because I want this is their baby. This is the Zach and Bob have been on this site for a long time.
Yeah,
Zach is so excited about it, and I'm anxious to see his report.
fantastic. All right. Well, with that, everybody, I think we'll wrap it up. Brian, thank you so much for joining us. It was a joy to have you here. I'm excited to see where the Paleo Digger goes from here.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Have a
We'll see you all next time. Thanks for joining us. Good night.